This is a presentation I've done at several shows, and I've updated it to make it all about me at different points. It's called A Pictopia to Call One's Own, a brief history of team-ups, crossovers, and shared realities in the comic strip and comic book universes. And you see some illustrations there from Pictopia, which I'll talk about. I want to start with, first of all, the autonomous creator. A single cartoonist and his or her comic strip or comic book feature. I'm going to use just the example of Little Abner to stand in for everything from Bone and Cerebus and A Distant Soil to Doonesbury and so forth. Al Capp created his fictional hillbilly, Little Abner, and surrounded him with a cast of characters, and in fact created a fictional hillbilly city called Dogpatch. And in this world of his own, he created a variety of stories. Sometimes they would interact with the real world. Here's Frank Frazetta ghosting the strip in the 1950s, and Little Abner gets to meet a Marilyn Monroe type. But the main idea here is that Al Capp does not have to cross over or compromise or dilute his vision. He doesn't have to interact with any other comic strip features or compromise the drawing style. Frazetta is clearly working in the Al Capp idiom that was established, maintaining the style of the strip and the look of the strip and the integrity of the world, I would argue. We're more used to comic book company universes, although they were originally built on the comic strip model. Siegel and Schuster's Superman, Bob Kane and Bob Finger's Batman, Dr. William Moulton Marston's Wonder Woman, they were all conceived on the newspaper feature idea. They were originally conceived as their own hermetically sealed worlds. Superman was in Metropolis, Batman was in Gotham City, and Wonder Woman was in Gateway City. They all had very distinctive looks to their strips. They even called them strips in those days, or features. And they seldom interacted, except for the cover of World's Finest Comics. It's important to remember that Superman and Batman never met until the 1950s. Here they are on the cover of World's Finest, but they are only in a very neutral universe. They're not in Gotham City. They're not in Metropolis. They're in Yellow World. And similarly, other covers show very abstract backgrounds, very neutral ground backgrounds. So Superman isn't visiting Gotham City. Batman isn't visiting Metropolis. Bob Kane's world, so to speak, is not really interacting with Siegel and Schuster's world. They're just kind of meeting in a neutral place just to promote the interior of the book. It wasn't until the 50s, as I said, they actually began to cross over in stories. Here again, they're meeting at a neutral watering hole somewhere out in the country, and Nick Cardy on the right is again an abstract skyline. You begin to see the breakdown of styles and a very generic kind of house style that all the characters start to adopt. This is true also of Wonder Woman and Green Lantern, Flash, Hawkman. As well as the Fawcett characters, Captain Marvel and Bullet Man and so on. These characters mostly just teamed up on the covers. But we are so used to seeing now companies that own these characters having them interact. The same thing was happening on the Timely side. You had Joe Simon and Jack Kirby's Captain America, Carl Burgos, the Human Torch, Bill Everett, the Submariner. Again, they were conceived as independent creations, autonomous creations, not designed to cross over with one another. They had distinctive artistic styles. They were thought of along the lines of the comic strip feature model. Nonetheless, they began teaming up, and you had what later became the Invaders. You had Captain America, Submariner, Human Torch teaming up constantly during World War II, and into the 1960s, where you had Marie Severin doing Bill Everett's Submariner and Jack Kirby's Hulk, epic battle over Miami Beach. But again, we're so used to seeing these characters drawn together in the same styles, they've lost their independent identity. Jim Steranko, historian of comics, could have drawn all the different styles. He could have drawn Wally Wood's Daredevil, Steve Ditko's Spider-Man, Kirby's various creations, but at this point in the 60s and 70s, it's now a game of the artist's personality dominating the character designs, and so any trace of the original creator, or preserving the style of the original feature, has been washed away. Unlike in the newspaper world, where Frazetta was trying to maintain the look of Al Cap, you now have Marvel artists and DC artists just trying to demonstrate their own personalities. John Buscema is doing the same thing a little bit later. By this point in the Marvel Universe, you have monsters and barbarians and vampires and pulp characters. You have Doc Savage. You have Dracula, Frankenstein, Kazar, who was from the pulps, Conan the Barbarian, Sax Rohmer's Fu Manchu's son, Shang-Chi. So all of these characters now are part of a sprawling Marvel universe. And again, we're so used to seeing them together and drawn in the same style that we no longer think of them as independent creations. Back in the newspaper side, you have Milton Caniff promoting himself and his comic strips, Terry and the Pirates in the 1940s, and Steve Canyon. It's interesting to note that here he is at the drawing board, surrounded by his characters who are suggesting story ideas to him. Here's the cast of Steve Canyon on the right. Two different worlds. Never the twain should meet, except in the most kind of Easter egg crossovers over the years. The same idea is being adopted by John Romita here on the left in a promotional piece. He's thinking of himself kind of in the vein of Milton Caniff sitting at the drawing board, but he's hardly created any of these characters. These are all mostly Steve Ditko characters. There's the Hulk, which is a Kirby character, of course. There's the Red Skull, which is a Kirby character. A few of his own flourishes, but he's now integrating them all into his own powerful personality and style. Joe Kubert has his galaxy of characters on the DC side. Dr. Fate, Sandman, Dr. Midnight, Starman, all of those, the Spectre, and so forth. So they're still thinking in terms of the comic strip tradition, but at this point they are doing something very different. They're integrating a variety of characters into their own styles. The Promotional Universe, Part 2. So we've already seen an example in World Finest Comics of a promotional universe. The covers where Superman and Batman meet, but not in the stories. This is an example of Joe Simon and Jack Kirby's Letterhead. They had a studio, and of course they created all these different features for competing comic book publishers. You have Captain America and the Red Skull, who for some reason is yellow, and all the Kid Gangs and the Guardian and so forth. None of these characters could meet, or some of these characters could not meet because they were being packaged for rival publishers, but they could meet. Do a kind of a class photo here on the letterhead, which promotes the studio. It'd be interesting to see some of those crossovers, but unfortunately, they could not happen. This was not unprecedented. The syndicates were doing this kind of promotional thing. Now, comic strip syndicates were creating features and syndicating them sometimes to rival newspaper publishers in the same city. So consequently, Crazy Cat here could not team up with Felix the Cat, who's down here, but they could all appear on the same promotional piece. Calendars were created. Louis Biederman was a staff artist at the Syndicate who drew all the characters. He mimicked most of the styles, but again, they could only meet on these kind of promotional materials. This is a magazine for the print industry called Circulation. And again, unfortunately, you could never cross them over in any kind of narrative, because what would you do? You'd have one newspaper on one side of town, the Detroit News, the Detroit Free Press would be carrying parts of the story. So it was impossible to have team-ups or a universe as we would know it, like Marvel or DC. Part 3, the Parody Universe. Now, I've alluded to these legal complications of ownership and licensing. If you have rival publishers, if you have rival newspapers, how can you team up some of these characters? Well, you can parody characters, and the most famous parody of all time probably is Super Duper Man by Wally Wood and Harvey Kurtzman. Here you have Superman meeting Captain Marvel, which, of course, rival publishers, National Comics and Fawcett Comics. They were, in fact, National was, in fact, suing Fawcett for copyright infringement. But fans presumably wanted to see these characters team up, even if it was only humorous, and they certainly got a kick out of seeing the competing archetypes fight it out, although in a humorous vein. This carried over into the 1960s. Marvel had its parody book, Not Brand Echh. DC had the Inferior Five. And what's interesting about these covers, you can see Marvel's Fantastic Four, which they published, and the Fantastic Four meets Superman. And over on the DC side, Superman meets the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man and a few other people. Submariner over here and so on. Again, these team-ups could not take place in the comic books. It was beyond imagining that Marvel and DC would actually have a licensed crossover, but they could somehow satisfy fan curiosity and interest by making fun of a potential crossover. These are a couple of my issues of Megaton Man from the 1980s, and oddly enough, I'm doing the same thing. I have my Superman archetype meeting the Fantastic Four, so to speak. Don't tell anybody I said that, but that's about all there is to it. Very, very common idea by this point. Also, Marvel was doing some pretty strange things in the 1970s that were actually proved to be very influential. Howard the Duck, which was a phenomenon in the mid-70s, it's almost difficult to explain how important Howard the Duck was. Here you have him kind of alluding to sword and sorcery, barbarism, and Spider-Man. Here's his origin page. He's flying through the universe. There are worlds upon worlds, worlds within worlds, worlds without end. Every man's mind is a universe. Those were profound conceptual ideas from Steve Gerber, and the idea that there was a funny animal universe and a barbarian universe and a superhero universe had profound effects far beyond the Howard the Duck phenomenon of the mid-70s. Part 4, the Special Occasion Neutral Ground Universe. So there are special places where characters can meet, Jim Steranko's History of Comics was a history of comics that appeared in 1970. And for those of us who sent away our $5 or $10, we got this mind-blowing publication with a wraparound cover. It was a large format. And the Submariner, Captain America, the Human Torch, the trio from Marvel, Timely, with the Red Skull and Nick Fury and Thor, are appearing on the same page as the Joker and Batman and Superman and the Shadow and Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, and Captain Marvel and Plastic Man. This had never taken place before, and again, it's not a narrative crossover, but it certainly provoked some thought about what would it be like to actually have these characters cross over from one universe to another. Here's the second volume of Steranko, and it's in day-glow colors, which don't reproduce too well, but you have, again, Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, Spider-Man, Captain Marvel. The Spirit is over on the right-hand corner. So, again, just mind-blowing, the idea that these characters might potentially team up in an actual comic book. Same thing was happening in Undergrounds, oddly enough. Here's Rand Holmes drawing the cover of the History of Underground Comics, and he's got the fabulous furry Freak Brothers and Wonder Warthog with Snappy Sammy Smoot and a bunch of Rick Griffin characters and a bunch of Crumb characters and Nard and Pat and even Felix the Cat and Crazy Cat are in the lower right-hand corner, on and on. Zap Comics had done actual jam universes. That might even qualify as a separate, distinct form of the crossover. Here you had Crumb, S. Clay Wilson, Victor Moscoso, Spain Rodriguez, Rick Griffin, Robert Williams, Gilbert Shelton, all jamming on the same piece of paper. I've been involved in some of these kinds of universes. It requires being in the same place at the same time or passing around a piece of Bristol board so that everybody can draw on it. Obviously, these are very stream of consciousness crossovers. Another kind of neutral ground crossover would be the cover of the Comics Journal, which was a magazine of criticism. Here you have Omaha the Cat Dancer and Dalgota the Spirit, Cerebus, American Flag, Neil the Horse, Zot, and Robert Crumb, all in the same drawing, but of course not in a real story. Just this is a kind of an editorial cartoon about which comic book company is going to fall over the cliff first back in the 1980s. On your right, you have Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, where he's grouped together a bunch of characters. Again, you might call this an educational kind of crossover. Spider-Man and Maggie and Dick Tracy and on and on. Here's Scott's Pyramid. Reality on the left, meaning on the right, and the picture plane on the top. Somebody will have to explain to me the theoretical meaning here, but for some reason, just to make it all about me, my character, Megaton Man, is almost exactly in the middle of the pyramid. I don't know what that means. I occupy a middle zone, I suppose. This is my crossover cover to the Comics Journal. And this was my chance to draw all sorts of characters from Hugo Pratt to Will Eisner to Enki Bilal to Steve Rude, Bill Loebs, Swamp Thing, Kirby, Frank Miller, Ed the Happy Clown, all in a team up. Basically, I just looked at a bunch of different poses and different pictures and was able to copy them line for line. So not a lot of complexity there. Could probably do this more easily in Photoshop today. Part 5, the cross-company crossover and company-wide event. So by this point, in the 1970s, companies were beginning to realize that they could actually make money by crossing over and teaming up their characters, most notably Superman versus Spider-Man by DC and Marvel in 1976. Marvel was doing something slightly different with Spider-Man meeting Dracula. What's interesting about that particular team-up is that the two universes, the undead vampire universe and the superhero universe, never quite meet. They just kind of cross near. It's kind of a close encounter kind of team-up. But the interesting thing about Superman and Spider-Man is that apparently Superman just never visited New York. He'd been in Metropolis the whole time. And wouldn't you know, he visits New York and runs smack dab into Spider-Man. No dimensional explanation, no universe explanation, just, hey, I happen to be in town. Superman versus Muhammad Ali was yet another kind of crossover, kind of interacting with the real world. You've got Fonzie and Cher and Kurt Vonnegut and Jimmy Carter and Sonny Bono and everybody in the world in the crowd scene. Of course, Superman meeting the heavyweight champion of the world, Muhammad Ali, in a kind of crossover. The company-wide crossovers, the granddaddies of them all, the Secret Wars and Crisis on Infinite Earths. What's interesting about these team-ups is that everybody is spending so much time in their costumes, they don't have time to be in their secret identities anymore. They're just full-time superheroes hanging out, warring with one another. Now, Part 6, the satirical or the synthetic universe. I've had some experience with this. Alan Moore created a story for Anything Goes #2 back in 1986 called In Pictopia, which I had the privilege to illustrate. It's a town that is comprised of newspaper comic strips and animated funny animals and superheroes. There's a kind of a hierarchy. The old-fashioned comic strip characters are down on their luck. Certain characters are published in black and white. They live in slums. They live in ghettos. Here we have Mike Kozala on the right is drawing the funny animal ghetto where people are downtrodden. We have a Nocturno. The magician character is the protagonist. He goes through town. There's a new gang of X-Men type mutant characters who are kind of the new bullies on the block. This was before Disney's Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which had no polemical content at all. Alan Moore was trying to make some kind of a comment about the corporatization of entertainment. Disney was just too busy corporatizing, so they took their characters and the Warner Brothers characters and the Fleischer cartoon characters and teamed them up, but they, of course, did not have any satirical point. They were just making money. The idea of company-wide crossovers has been internalized among independent creators, most notably the Image Gang. Image Comics was formed to be a crossover universe by independent creators, although they've only had just a few team-ups, relatively speaking. Image United on the left was a team-up, kind of a colossal Secret Wars type of book that has, to date, not been completed, but you have Eric Larson's Savage Dragon and Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane and everyone else, Jim Valentino, Shadowhawk, and so forth. On the right, you have Kurt Busiek, who exerted a little more control and more thoroughly investigated the concept of creating a whole universe at a time. So instead of creating a title character with a surrounding world, he creates a whole universe in a place called Astro City, obviously. Alan Moore, again, and along with Rick Veitch and Steve Bissette, created in 1963, which was published by Image Comics. I did some of the lettering for the series. This was conceived as a Marvel Comics group type of universe. So again, creators are thinking not just in terms of creating a comic strip feature or a title character, they're creating an entire interactive universe. And again, this remains unfinished, but Alan Moore had some polemical commentary to make about the 1993 comic book industry. It's a shame that it's not the big Secret Wars annual never came out. This was the splash page to the Tomorrow Syndicate. What's interesting here is that the nod is given to a lot of independent creators. Starting from the upper left, you have A Distant Soil, you have my own Bizarre Heroes universe, Max Immortal, Normal Man, Cerebus, Mr. Monster, Frank, Bean World, Tyrant. There's Understanding Comics back there, Flaming Carrot. And everything now is in its own dimension. It's possible to cross over into these different worlds by crossing dimensions. And independent creators are now thinking not only of teaming up characters, but teaming up entire universes. So the Big Bang universe meets the 1963 universe. Gary Carlson and Chris Ecker and Jim Valentino did a kind of imitating their own company-wide crossovers. Eric Larson and the Big Bang universe on the right. But if you think about it, it's not such a new idea. Jack Kirby and Stan Lee in the Fantastic Four were really doing a very similar thing. They were taking Plastic Man and the Human Torch and the Invisible Man, H.G. Wells, and combining them in the form of the Invisible Woman in this case. And they were using things like, they were using the Submariner. Later you'd have Captain America on the Avengers side. So even within the same title, the Fantastic Four, you have a kind of synthetic universe happening. So it's not a new idea, really. This was my own creation. This was kind of patterned after the Simon Kirby letterhead. This was a print that I did in 1991, and it features characters from Megaton Man, Bizarre Heroes, Border Worlds, and as well as my pseudonymous Anton Drek comics, Wendy Whitebread and Forbidden Frankenstein. And I decided to put all these characters on the same print. This is like a 15 by 20, 24-inch print. And until I did that, I never thought of really crossing over these characters. But then I thought, why not? Megaton Man has appeared in a couple of team-ups, most notably with Image Comics, The Savage Dragon on the left and Normal Man on the right. Interesting thing about the Normal Man team-up, and you can see Pandacon and Zot and Flaming Carrot and Cherry Pop-Tart and a bunch of other characters. Neil the Horse is stuck in there. Madman by Mike Allred. Jeff Smith's Bone is in the background in the center. All of these characters were drawn by the original artists. Jim Valentino took this piece of Bristol board around to a comic book convention and had everybody draw their own characters. So this qualifies as a jam universe. There's actually a Cerebus and a Journey and Wolf and Bird by the late Batten Lash in the background. These were, again, interior pages from those same two comic books. These were my characters on the left, the Megatropolis Quartet, Yarn Man, Liquid Man, Rubber Brother, and the Phantom Jungle Girl. And you can see the Savage Dragon down in the lower left corner. On the right, you have the Normal Man team up, again, with Bob Burden's Flaming Carrot, turned into an Image comic superhero with Captain Everything and Megaton Man. Beanworld is floating around there somewhere. Beanworld. Mr. Spook is in the top right panel. My own characters, I've been influenced by this universe idea of different generations of characters, different generations of Megaton Men. This is the Golden Age Megaton Man on the left. The actual Megaton Man is in the center in the background, and Ms. Megaton Man is on the right of that image. Tyranno Man is the beginning of a different inflection in my work. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But this was also a comic book that ties into the Megaton Man universe. It was kind of the first Bizarre Heroes comic book. I also did Border Worlds on the left and the Anton Drek comics on the right. All of these are now integrated into a single universe, which I'm still working out on paper. Here's the Bizarre Heroes series, which I self-published on the left. And I have Megaton Man meeting the Anton Drek Forbidden Frankenstein character. All you had to do was put clothes on him, and he became Frankenstein again. And I'm still working all this out, as I just said. This is a prose series that I'm serializing on the internet. And Ms. Megaton Man, the Ms. Megaton Man maxi series, she turned out to be the perfect narrator. We're up to about year 4 in the series, but she's met Megaton Man, she's met the Silver Age Megaton Man, she's met the Megatropolis Quartet, and she's beginning to meet some of the Bizarre Heroes and having interactions with them. So to take a step back, Part 7, Literary Miscegenation, Mythological Pantheons, and Philip Jose Farmer's Wold-Newton Universe. I wanted to go back in time to say that way before comic books, team-ups were a literary occurrence. In fact, they had political ramifications. The earliest epic that we have in literature is the Gilgamesh epic. Gilgamesh, the urban hero, and Enkidu, the rural or pastoral hero, were teamed up, and they both had long oral traditions of narratives. They seem to have been brought together, in part at least, to politically integrate the people who were the followers of these mythological heroes, uniting the city and the country in a Sumerian epic poem. All of the classical pantheons, the Hellenistic, the Greek, the Roman, the Norse gods, the Egyptian, are in fact team-ups just like the Marvel and DC universe. These were all independent gods, independent tribal gods, with long histories of oral traditions, some of them based on actual living heroes who became deified over the course of retelling these stories around the campfires. Here's a more modern update of the Roman gods, I believe. And again, the same process of bringing them together into a single house style. We're so used to seeing Mercury and Jupiter and Venus and Apollo all together that we no longer think of them as individual deities. But polytheism, in fact, was built on monotheism. In a more modern vein, Philip Jose Farmer has tapped this idea in a couple of books in the late 1960s and early 70s. Tarzan Alive and Doc Savage, His Apocalyptic Life, where he takes the 19th century and 20th century pulp adventure characters, including the Shadow, Sherlock Holmes, the Scarlet Pimpernel, Sir Hugh Drummond, Philip Marlowe, Mr. Moto, Travis McGee, James Bond, and interrelates them along with Tarzan and Doc Savage. They are one big family tree. For some reason, if they were all interrelated, it's odd that they all struck different literary deals with pulp publishers. I don't know why they didn't all just go and collective bargain with the pulp industry. Nonetheless, that was a project that Farmer became famous for, the so-called Wold-Newton Universe. I parodied this myself in Megaton Man. I have little Philip Jose, the janitor here, and the Megaton Man family tree. I have the Golden Age Megaton Man. I have Doc Megaton Man. I have a frog somewhere in there. I have the Wolverine, the Shade, and so forth. Alan Moore, again, is the one who's used this idea to greatest effect in the comic book world with his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. You've got Captain Nemo and Alan Quatermain and the Invisible Man and Tom Sawyer and all public domain characters, but almost explicitly taking Philip Jose Farmer's idea of the Wold-Newton universe and turning it into a Victorian gaslight supergroup. Part 7, the voluntary team-up or the pseudo-corporate crossover. So all of these influences can be seen in my generation of creators, certainly. And perhaps the most obvious example of this is a project called War of the Independents, published by Red Anvil Comics. This has got Zippy the Pinhead, the Tick, Zot, Cerebus, Bone, every character under the sun, Milk and Cheese, and so on. Too Much Coffee Man. And this was not drawn by the respective artists. This was simply people signing off and agreeing to let their character appear in a kind of Crisis on Infinite Earths Secret Wars. I was drafted to draw a page, and I ended up doing the back cover, and then I ended up doing an entire issue, which was number 4. And you can see I'm drawing Milk and Cheese and Zippy, Cerebus, Bone, Too Much Coffee Man, Drunk Monkey, as well as my own characters, Megaton Man and Yarn Man. I had to learn how to draw the Archie characters, although they did not make the final cut. Archie pulled out at the last minute, but these are the Archie characters along with the MLJ characters, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and so forth. There's the Tick and Zippy and Mr. Spook, Yasagi Yojimbo, and so on. These were some of the other pages of artwork that I did for that issue. And the rappers, Public Enemy, the bottom of the right image, Public Enemy is in this team up, along with the Toxic Avenger and Rat Bastard, Madman. So that is my presentation on crossovers, team-ups, shared universes, independent universes, and thank you so much for watching.